it is my pleasure to introduce what I think is a spectacular panel. Bob Berkebile, who's the principal at BNIM Architects, Jay Johnson, who's Assistant Professor of Geography and Indigenous Studies, David Loewenstein, who's a writer and an artist, Suzanne Weiss, the Executive Director of the Nebraska Arts Council, Dan Wildcat, who's the Director of Haskell Environmental Research Studies, and of course, Chairman Rocco Landesman. So, will you help me welcome the panel, and Bob Berkebile will be first up.
Thanks very much, Sarah Lynn, and I'm delighted to be here. I think we all are. I want to start by asking you a question, a personal question. When you think back, what is the most beautiful place you have ever been in or experienced? So keep that in your mind. How many of you selected a place in nature? How many selected a place in some kind of built environment, a home, a cathedral? Yeah, thank you very much. Another question. How many of you have had the opportunity to read this really important paper?
What is it?
Creative Placemaking, the subject of our conversation today. And if you haven't, I encourage you to find a copy online or elsewhere and take advantage of it. I find it to be a really important collection of ideas, and at the same time, in my thinking, it has one critical omission, and that is nature. We know that our response to nature is profound, that the environment within which we place ourselves can change literally our lives, our community, and our planet. And I would argue that it is the most misunderstood and the most critical element in placemaking. So I would like to try to make that case in the next few minutes. Actually, more than 2,000 years ago, Hippocrates alluded to this very fact. He observed that our well-being is affected by what he called our settings. And over the centuries that followed, a lot of others have endorsed that concept, elaborated on it, and agreed with him. But at the turn of the 20th century, something dramatically changed that. And it was the introduction of the Industrial Revolution and Western scientific thought. Can you hear me in back? I want to, still okay? Yeah, thank you.
Bob, if you want to go in there.
Maybe that's, I need one other thing. Have all these props or something.
You get an extra 30 seconds because
So at the turn of the 20th century, these huge technological and cultural changes that came with a rush eclipsed all that previous genius accumulated knowledge over those centuries. And the Industrial Revolution drew certainly Western culture indoors. We turned away from a natural world that was very different from the one that we embraced, where warmth and illumination was constant regardless of the time of day or the season. In some ways, we quickly adapted to this new environment, urban and indoors. Only 100 years ago, the vast majority of us lived in nature, in rural America. And today, that has entirely reversed, where we are living primarily in cities. But our species evolved over millions of years in response to the cycles of Earth and Sun. And as a result, we recognize that predictable biochemical and behavioral changes are no longer so predictable. And scientists question the trade-offs we unwittingly made in order to live sealed up in an artificially heated, cooled, and lighted world that is structured around economic rather than biological concerns. A lot of scientists today are beginning to address this, and maybe the leader of that movement was E.O. Wilson at Harvard, who created a whole new science called biophilia. And there's a book on biophilic design that I encourage you to consider. Wilson's science, grossly oversimplified, is that we are hardwired to be an integral part of nature, and that by separating ourselves from nature, we have dramatically reduced our health, well-being, and our ability to be creative and productive and successful. We find that when we design environments, including, for example, schools, using these ideas, that students' test scores increase 12 to 17%. Health records improve. Noise levels go down. Operating costs go down. Everything changes. In a corporate office building in Amsterdam, who decided to use natural conditioning rather than the normal mechanical systems, they were concerned in the design phase about the noise from an accompanying office may be interrupting a conversation in someone's office. And without the masking noise of the mechanical system, they were looking for a solution to replace that. And they selected the use of water, pouring down stairways and in streams in the corridors, and the use of wild landscape in that office complex. And what they found was all these same results emerged: dramatic increases in human health and productivity. The Chinese refer to this as feng shui, or literally wind and water. It's not easy to translate into Western terms, but roughly, feng shui more or less corresponds to what we call ambiance, or a place's distinctive atmosphere. According to Chinese tradition, the proper balance of qi ensures good feng shui. These things could counter some of the environmental stress that we are experiencing living in cities, or, if you will, bad feng shui. Behavioral scientists don't use the feng shui terminology, but if you really look at their method of analyzing environmental performance in terms of stimulation, it boils down to exactly the same issues. I believe we have forgotten what our ancestors knew and our scientists are rediscovering. The evidence of that lapse surrounds us, not just in dirty oceans and the chemical haze that obscures our views of the Grand Canyon and the stars at night in our cities, but in the rising incidence of stress-related disorders. I agree entirely with the white paper that art is a powerful transformative tool, and that we need to pay far more attention to the animation of places with economic and cultural activity. But I'm equally convinced that the most critical aspect of placemaking is to restore and celebrate our relationship with nature. Our lives depend on it. Sarah Lynn, do we do our questions now or later?
No, we're going to hold questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
So as a cultural geographer and a Native American who teaches Indigenous studies here at the University of Kansas, I've become increasingly interested in studying place, and through my research to find connections between Western and Indigenous philosophies of place. It's my hope and the hope of my collaborators to find through place a common ground for conversations that may bridge Indigenous community concerns with academic research. Perhaps surprisingly to many of us, defining place can be extremely problematic at times, mainly because it's a taken for granted assumption of our everyday language. We all assume that place requires no definition. I mistakenly left out a definition in a grant application once. I'll never do it again. Fortunately or unfortunately, place is also a complex concept discussed and defined from numerous angles, exposed to the intellectual rigors of philosophy and the social sciences with a myriad of definitions. So in order to provide some clarity, at least for my comments here today, I want to define how I'll be discussing place. I'll be focusing on two conceptualizations of place. First, place is a way of understanding the world, or as Dr. Wildcat has described it, as the construction of meaning found in the process of living in the world. And second, I'll be defining place as the embodied location of everyday struggle for meaning, whether political, cultural, or economic. Placelessness, many humanists and social scientists have argued, is a primary component of our modern Western condition. We have, in our increasingly globalized society, lost touch with the importance of place. In some ways, this placelessness is a byproduct of the artificial divide we've created between culture and nature, which has led to a loss of connection to our landscape and our environment. Despite this placelessness in modern society, though, we do indeed continue to engage in placemaking. Making place does not require special sensibilities or cultivated skills. It is a common response to common curiosities. What happened here? Who was involved? What was the place like? And why should it matter? And anyone can be a placemaker who has the inclination. Everyone, I would argue, does in fact partake in some ways in making places. Despite the placelessness of our society, we continue to have the ability to make places, and continually we are creating meaning within the places in our daily landscape. It's impossible for us to dwell within our landscape without attaching meaning to the places we encounter. Despite the fact that we are continually making places, though, our active engagement with our landscape, I would argue, from what is missing from that is our place worlds, is a connection to our many cultural texts and histories. Lawrence is a city with a proud history, and our cultural texts and histories are still, at least in some places, preserved within important locations in our landscape. Our history as a free state settlement in the midst of the struggle over slavery has left an indelible mark on the community, affecting many people's perception of our town. Even though I must admit I'm one of the few people I know who had family members who were living here during the border war period. Border war now means an entirely different thing, I realize. But this is only one of the many stories our town and our landscapes have to tell. So the question I'd like to pose today to our panel and audience members is, how can we, through creative placemaking, engage the other important stories Lawrence has to tell? Can we use creative placemaking as a method for finding common ground between the various cultural groups that make up Lawrence to enhance our shared pride in our common places? Thank you.
It's great to be here today. It's about time, actually, I think, for having this conversation at this level. I'm really excited to be here with this distinguished group. So thanks to the Spencer and the NEA and Chairman Landesman for bringing us together. This idea of placemaking is something that I've spent the better part of the last 20 years engaged in, from community gardens to murals to the Percolator art space over at 9th and New Hampshire. My work as an artist has been driven really by the desire to create opportunities that I wanted for myself, but also for others, for regular folks to re-inhabit public spaces in their hometowns and fill them with images and conversations that reflect their own hopes and dreams. To begin to reoccupy our visual environment with something more than advertising and sloganeering, and to bring a sense of shared culture, memory, and possibility back to civic life. Creative placemaking in my practice as a muralist is instrumental in giving residents the tools and space to share their community's story with a wider public. This is vitally important, I believe, because, as the writer Arlene Goldbard says, someone taking part in a collaborative project like this is able to have a very full and rich experience of citizenship, to be one among many whose ideas and efforts are welcomed equally, who pursue common aims in a climate of respect and affection, who together make something meaningful to themselves and the whole community. Even in a dark time, this experience foreshadows true democracy and full, vibrant citizenship. Here's one example. This is from a project in Newton, Kansas a couple of years ago. Working in public always attracts attention, and working in public on a project whose very purpose is to represent a part of how a community sees itself makes a mural site a lightning rod and also an ongoing social forum. The sidewalk next to the wall becomes a jury box. The parking lot next to the mural becomes a stage for speakers, and the cars passing by the mural in progress are a chorus of horn blasts, some approving, others not so much. This was the inspiration for a dancer choreographer named Sarah, who I met in Newton during this project. We were in the middle of our design process in Newton. This is an open process where folks sort of self-select to help develop the theme and then the actual imagery in the mural. And after the second or third meeting, Sarah came up to me and said, you know, I just did a residency with Liz Lerman in Washington, and we were doing community dance. And I have this idea, I think it's crazy, but tell me what you think. I'd like to gather together residents like you're doing for the mural and choreograph a dance that sort of finds its cues in the design you're creating that'll be painted on the wall. And we could premiere it at the dedication of the mural. Well, she went ahead and did this. I thought it was a fantastic idea, and the dance was premiered at the dedication of the mural. So what was an overlooked parking lot in front of this blank wall initially had become a new community gathering spot where people shared their stories, they argued over civic issues, and retold the town's history. Placemaking at that particular spot in Newton had begun. With each of the projects I'm involved with, I take as my first instruction a quote by one of Kansas's great visionary placemakers: "Consult the wisdom of the place." Wes Jackson, president of the Land Institute, has said about his work very often. But what if we employed his direction, you know, when we built a house, or when we planted a garden, or when we chose a place to live, or in my case, when I plan a public artwork? Consult the wisdom of the place. You see, because when that wisdom is not consulted, one person's placemaking can turn into another person's gentrification. I mean, imagine a place in a town like Lawrence that over the years, with the hard work of artists and residents, has cultivated like a cultural corridor adjacent to a large open field at the edge of downtown and a working class neighborhood. And imagine that this place, beloved by a large and diverse audience, is on the cusp of becoming a sustainable place with that field at its heart. But just at that very moment, a developer decides to put a large chain hotel on the field, completely and permanently altering the dynamic of the place. If this were to happen, it would really bum me out. It would be a missed opportunity that in a small town like Lawrence's, we can't afford to miss. A placemaking overlooked. But what can we do? I wonder, maybe we should adapt the phrase creative placemaking in some instances to something more like creative place sustaining, place keeping, or place enhancing. Because in some cases, the places don't need to be made. They just need to be recognized and cared for. Thank you. Two quick questions to consider that I always do. One is the impetus for a particular placemaking project generated by the residents, workers, and business people who inhabit the place? Or is it generated by speculative, but well-intentioned, or not, outsiders? And a second question, very personal to me. As a director or choreographer or designer of a placemaking project, what is the right balance between my creative vision and that of the group of people I am working with or for? Thank you.
when the Kansas Arts Commission went down, I swore I would never cross the border. But I realize it's not about you. As the director of a state arts agency, we work with a vast range of communities, ranging from densely urban to extremely rural, providing grants, technical support, and capacity building. For the purposes of this panel, I decided to focus on creative placemaking in extremely rural areas of the Great Plains and Intermountain West, where the concept of a city is a community of 10,000 people that can be 50 miles distant from the next city. So for the purposes of my remarks, when I say rural, I am speaking of isolated communities of less than 30,000 individuals. I read a statistic provided by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that states nearly 50 million people live in non-metropolitan America, covering approximately 2,000 counties. These counties contain only 17% of the U.S. population, but extend across 80% of the land area, which I always find a hard concept to grasp even when I'm traveling in areas of my own state that meet this criteria. My experience with these rural communities is that they don't think about art in the same way that is addressed in larger urban areas. In a subtle way, they already do creative placemaking by utilizing resources at hand. Banks will put up easels in the bank lobby to accommodate art exhibitions. Touring performers often find themselves tuning up behind a pile of wrestling mats in the high school gym. And unused downtown storefronts are retrofitted to become a community theater. Two heartening trends I've noticed recently is the proliferation of new public libraries built with exhibition spaces in mind and dedicated performing halls attached to public school buildings. So these guys really know, I think, how to create things in a very practical way. Rural communities that are actively engaged in economic development are often very adept at cherry-picking federal and state programs that meet their needs. Department of Transportation dollars, Department of Agriculture programs, rehabilitation tax credits, guided by programs like Main Street and others. The concept of cultural tourism, which became very popular in the late 1990s and early 2000s, caught on in many of these towns, but have had mixed results. One of the things I am most excited about with the more recent research in creative placemaking, and again, I refer back to the document. If you've not read it, I strongly encourage you to do so, is the notion that the arts can drive a community's development internally. In other words, allowing the arts to thrive benefits your citizens in more ways than just tourism, and often I think they often think in that very narrow construct. While the state arts agencies and humanities councils regularly support rural cultural activities, it is rare for these small towns to access or even be aware of the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities. This, despite the fact that they deal regularly with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is gargantuan by comparison. With the recent crisis in school funding, I've been doing a lot of thinking about how the loss of fine arts specialists and the de-emphasis of the arts in school curriculum at all levels interfaces with the notion of creative placemaking. In Nebraska, rural communities are the largest single per capita user of our Artists in Schools and Communities program. This statistic makes me very nervous because these artists, which are meant to supplement and enrich existing schools' curriculum and experience, are actually providing the instruction that was lost by laid-off teachers in the last round budget cuts. The benefits of arts education to children, like the importance of the arts as being central to helping communities, requires no further discussion here. What I would like to express is my conviction that in the long term, if arts education is not a central strategy in arts-driven communities, young citizens, as they mature, will not have the capacity to discern meaningful artistic expression from the momentary fads in popular culture. The main issue, as I see it,
is how you maintain, or better still, increase the level of arts product and experience found in rural America. As the chairman has found, one makes reference about Peoria at one's peril. By that I mean it is very difficult to have a dialogue about artistic quality without stepping on people's toes. Yet despite the admirable, holistic approach that small communities take to creative placemaking, they often don't know what they don't know. If the local school has cut arts education, the problem is compounded. Interestingly though, band programs seem to survive. I suspect because you can't field a football team without the band that plays the fight song and national anthem. I believe that those of us in the state arts agency field who work most closely with rural communities bear much of the responsibility for ensuring quality arts activities. Having said that, I believe that the state arts agencies are in the best position to do what is right in both the short term and with an eye for the long view. To illustrate that, I'd like to refer to the photograph in the screen. The artist demonstrating plein air sketching to her one-room school charges is on our Artists in Schools roster. Under the administration of an educational service unit, she circuit rides to Class 1 schools scattered over an area larger than Connecticut in the Nebraska Sandhills ranch country. Unlike Dave, though, she is not a good artist. And although she is an enthusiastic teacher, she barely grasps the content of essential learning standards in the visual arts, despite our efforts in Omaha to provide her with additional training. Additional dollars, here, go to this conference, go do this, hoping for the best. Yet we fund her residencies anyway. Are we being fair to artists from urban areas who are rejected from our roster for similar deficiencies? Probably not. But are we being fair to the children of these isolated ranches by not allowing them the opportunity to learn what plein air means and the opportunity to practice it from atop a handy propane tank? This is what I mean about short-term solutions and investing in the long view. My hope is that one of these kids, because he knows what plein air means, will, when he grows up, lead the fundraising efforts to bring a traveling exhibition of American Impressionism from a noted university collection to his small town. Are we as funders doing enough to understand that if the concept of creative placemaking is fully grasped and acted upon by small communities, we must have in place a funding criteria for grant applications that allow a certain amount of leeway in how the project is initiated or presented? I recently encountered such a scenario in my own office.
Suzanne, you're about that.
One of my program officers was set to reject a grant proposal written by the Chamber of Commerce in a small town because he felt the chamber didn't really understand how to utilize the exhibition of late 19th century photographs that they wanted to install in the local train station museum. The proposal had all the elements we asked for: evidence of good planning, evidence of collaboration, the whole ball of wax. What the proposal writer didn't do, however, was write from the vantage point of a professional arts administrator. It was a Chamber of Commerce person, and that she wrote from the concept of tourism. Therefore, we were set to reject a perfectly decent grant just because it didn't possess the elements that we normally look at. So my questions to you are twofold. Again, how do we mix the whole concept of the importance of arts education in our communities as part of the whole idea of creative placemaking? And secondly, how are we as funders, or those that support these efforts, do so in a way that understands the process? Thank you.
Gelesa, Zoyaha, Yushiha, Kadane, Adene. Good morning. Bring everyone greetings from Haskell Indian Nations University. And, you know, speaking about stories and narratives and peoples and place, how incredible is it that, you know, Lawrence, Kansas has you know, this beautiful University of Kansas, but also has Haskell Indian Nations University, which is the de facto national American Indian University in the United States. So I bring you greetings from the 130-some First Nations students that are attending Haskell from over, I think this semester we've only got 36 states represented, including Alaska, in our student population. So we truly have an international institution here. And I want to thank everyone for their incredible comments that they've made today. And I'm going to play off, really, what's been said. And although my style is cramped, it takes me like 2 minutes to do an introduction. And we tell stories. I don't have any stories that I can tell in 5 minutes. So I guess what I'll do is I'm just going to be honest, and I'm going to do full disclosure. Okay? You know, the world has problems. Universities have departments. And because the more I've been in them, I realized something. I realized that my life for the last 20 years has been, I am a recovering academic. I want you to know that. I don't have a 12-step program per se, but I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to try to find the advice. I've heard this quote attributed to two different sources, Mark Twain, someone. I heard it by way of an elder, Satchel Paige. And a young ball player came to Satchel Paige, apparently, and said, hey, you know, Satchel, give me some good advice. What can I do to be as good a ball player as you are? And what Satchel said, young man, just remember, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that just ain't so that causes all the problems. And that's what I've been doing for 20 years now. I've been trying to throw out all that stuff I thought I knew. And I think there's some hope. There's some hope because I think what we have the opportunity to do in Lawrence, Kansas, with the creative power and the beauty of this place, the geography. Remember, 100 years ago, this was the Twin Rivers city, defined by the Wakarusa on the south and the Kaw here along the north. And there are many of us who honor that and recognize that and honor the people who, had the first drugstore in the Wakarusa wetlands, the Kaw Indians, the Osage, who made trips to get the medicines they needed to keep their families, their nations, their communities healthy. Yeah, we've got to rid of ourselves of some of these invidious dichotomies. And thank you, Bob, for contributing that. Where did we come up with this notion of the nature-culture dichotomy? Yeah, we can accomplish some things by thinking about nature and some things by thinking about culture, but separately. But I would argue in the big picture it becomes incredibly miseducative. That what we have to do is to reconnect culture with nature. If you want examples, go to Haskell Indian Nations University. Because the Crow traditions and their physical culture is very different than the Pueblos. I wonder why. Montana's not like the Four Corners area. And those Ojibways of the Great Lakes, their homes are really different than the Seminoles of the Everglades. Throughout most of human history, everyone in this room right now, you have a richer heritage as a tribal person than you do as a member of a modern nation state. I want you to think about that. Everyone. Your ancestors existed in human communities as clan members, as tribal members, long before they became citizens of nation states, modern nation states. I don't know how much time I've used up. I'm 2 minutes? Do I have 1 minute?
You can close it.
I can close it. God, the oppressor never leaves We've got to think in space, not time. Okay. Okay. So here's what I'm going to leave you with then. I think we can rid ourselves in Lawrence, Kansas of what is the dominant problem of this society, and I think I might have some people who would agree with this. We are victims of insulated ignorance. Look at the way we educate children and where we educate children. And I don't know why anyone should be worried about thinking in boxes. If you spend all your life in boxes and your curriculum is in boxes, you're going to think in boxes. And now, here's my question. What do we do when the world that people pay attention to is this? No, I'm serious. I'm raising this as a serious question. I was giving a lecture on environment a while back, and a colleague in a tribal college said, I want to know your definition of environment, because this is my students' environment.
There's a great 5 minutes. Wow, there's a great country song called 5 Minutes. I think it's Lauren Morgan maybe who first recorded it. But basically, the gist of the song is, you've got 5 minutes to tell me why I shouldn't walk out that door and never see you again the rest of my life. So I've got 5 minutes, I think, or less, to tell you why the NEA has any relevance or any relation to what you're all doing and why any of you should care. And I think in the previous presentations, important issues have been raised that we want to engage. One of the things we do have, and I'm always called on the carpet whenever I refer to our budget as words that they hate to see me use, like pathetic. And there are other words. What we do have is a platform, and we have a forum with which we can engage issues and subjects like that have just been raised here. I could engage any number of them, and maybe we will in the Q&A. But my job, as I've conceived it, is really to make the case within the federal government why the arts should be part of domestic policy, why the arts matter as much as anything else that concerns the federal government. Nutrition, shelter, safety, health, all of those things. And I realized I think the first day after I was nominated that if I went around the administration and the Congress saying the city opera is going to go out of business by Thanksgiving if they don't get $6 million, people are going to say, well, that's terrible, that's a shame, but we've got higher priorities on our plate right now than what happens to the city opera. But if I can go around and make the case, the narrative that arts are integral to the real problems that we're facing as a country and as a people and as a society, that the arts have a place in the solution kit, then it's a little bit of a different story. That arts can be part of economic development, of urban renewal, that the arts intersect with all of the other activities of the federal government. And I'll just cite one study that we've used in addition to what Ann Markison has done that's been referred to, is a study that was done at the University of Pennsylvania where they studied over a 10-year period 2 cities, Philadelphia and Baltimore, and they studied communities where there were an arts presence, cultural organizations, and ones where there weren't. And the findings were very dramatic and compelling. One is that where you had the arts, where you had an arts presence, the civic fabric was tremendously enhanced. People who were involved in the arts are much more likely we're losing sound here, I think, much more likely to vote, much more likely to join other organizations. It's a tremendous force for social and civic cohesion in a society, the arts are. The other aspect is referred to before with, Suzanne referred to with arts education, that you have demonstrably lower levels where you have the arts of juvenile delinquency and truancy for reasons that are stupidly obvious. Kids want to stay in school more when they're engaged with what's going on there. And thirdly, arts as an economic driver as a force for economic renewal. And I think we all know we all have the data and the story about that. And on a more fundamental level, of course, arts are part of our humanity, part of who we are. And it comes back to arts. When we're talking about a place, it is art that informs the identity of that place, of how we conceive of ourselves, who we think we are. And I see it especially in small and rural communities, when these communities want to make a case to their young people, to their younger generations, about why they should stay, why they should care about that place, why they should value it. Well, the arts play a tremendous role in forming that sense of self-identity, of who we are in this particular place. And my point has been, and is going to continue to be, as long as I'm there, why the arts have to be in the national conversation, why they have to be a part of our domestic policy. And when we get into the discussion, we can go into how I'm going about that with the different federal agencies and other areas. But the arts are as important as anything else that the federal government or any other government deals with, and that's our story, and we're sticking to it.
We have until 1 o'clock to have a discussion, to have a dialogue, but I'm going to jump that with one more question to you, Rocco. Will you tell us about one or two of those initiatives that you have going at the federal level that you feel really good about, that are somehow symbolic of what you're doing with placemaking?
Well, sure. There's a bunch of them. Since we're in Kansas, I can talk about Kathleen Sebelius and Department of Health and Human Services. Kathleen is one of my best friends in Washington, and while we're friends, we are not equals. I'll never forget Norman Mailer saying to his wife, we're not equals. And Kathleen and I are not equals. If you look at our budgets, ours is about $150 million. And hers 900 billion, a little disconnect. But as when we put out a joint white paper, we're not equals, but we were on the same page. And it became readily apparent to me that in her portfolio, which is the entire arc of human development, health, that there are numerous obvious intersections with the arts, starting with childhood development. The use of the arts in very early cognition, especially music, but other of the arts. From a very early age, the arts play a tremendous role in very, very early human development. Mental health, obviously. Substance abuse, often. Geriatrics. There are numerous intersections. So Kathleen came over to the NEA. We held we produced a white paper like we did with Ann Marcus, and the one that's been referred to. We got experts in the field who had any knowledge of points of possible intersection between our agencies. And we elected to put together a group that produced a white paper that, first of all, identified the areas of possible connection, summarized the data that was known in the field that was already easily accessible, and then set out some very doable projects that we could work on together with our joint expertise and mainly their dollars. And we've done the same thing with HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD put out a $100 million NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability, in their Choice Neighborhoods program that, for the first time, invited arts organizations to apply for funding. And we sit at the table with HUD and make a joint determination about the recipient of those funds. Well, that's access to another $100 million that we wouldn't have had before, because Sean Donovan, the Secretary of HUD, understands that his agency is not just about building housing units, it's about the quality of life. The same thing with Ray LaHood at the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation now is not just about engineering and road building, it's about the quality of life. And when you're talking about the quality of life, you're talking about the arts. So we have a partnership with the Department of Transportation. Same thing with the Department of Agriculture. And we're now, for the first time, on the Rural Council at the Department of Agriculture. There are numerous intersections of the arts in all these agencies that are going to be very important sources of resources for us, number one, And secondly, I think emblematic of the administration's real mantra that these agencies shouldn't exist in isolation in individual silos, but should relate to each other. And from my perspective, the arts are a perfect fulcrum for this kind of interagency collaboration because there are arts in each one of these agencies. And I haven't even mentioned the Department of Education. It's another one altogether, but that we're making progress there too. But this is an important way, I think, to get the arts into the national conversation, certainly at the level of the federal government.
Thank you. There's a lot of smart people, good minds, good questions in the room, so I would like to take some questions. And if you could, there's a question over there, and if you could say who you'd like to address it to, that would be great.
Well,
And boom, your voice.
Okay. Barbara Kerr, and I am a KU faculty member in counseling psychology who studies artists, writers, musicians, and inventors. I'd like to address my question to Dr. Landesman.
First time I've been called that in years. It's literally true, I suppose.
Okay.
I can't cure your illnesses.
Rocco.
Right, Rocco's good.
All right. As you were talking about the various organizations you're collaborating with, I wanted to ask about any possible collaborations with National Science Foundation. I've had funding for 20 years from NSF for the development of talent. And when I was presenting there this last year, I don't mean to be insulting, but they were kind of flailing around trying to understand innovation. You know, they want to do something about innovation, but really have very little understanding of what innovators are like, what the innovation process is like, not to mention creating innovative places. And so I think this is a very important intersection for the arts because I think we have something as creative people to teach science about how to find, how to welcome, and how to bring together innovators.
We're just beginning discussions with the National Science Foundation.
Great.
We have a guy at the NEA, Bill O'Brien, who's working on this particular subject. When you're talking about creativity, imagination, innovation, you're talking about very often about both the arts and the sciences. And if you're talking about us as a country and our future profile in the world, it's not, our future is not going to be expanding our manufacturing base. It's going to be in the areas of creativity and imagination and innovation. And the arts have an important role to play there, and we're going to find ways to develop that jointly. It's very important.
Okay, so another question. Yes, thank you.
So I'm wondering, and unfortunately I haven't had a chance to look through the entire white paper.
Suzanne, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Jermaine Holingwood, Assistant Professor, Film and Media Studies Department. I'm just wondering for all of you to speak to maybe how digital technologies or new media technologies fit in to this vision of creative placemaking, if at all. And I know that Dr. Wildcat, you mentioned, with a slight negative connotation of words in your mouth, about this sort of almost like ultimate privatization of commonplace or detriment to creative placemaking, that you see your students kind of using technologies in that way. So
right.
I kind of wanted to hear a little bit more about your perspective on that.
Well, I sort of gave you my perspective. I think one of the problems that we have is that, you know, it's hard to pay attention in a larger environmental sense if people have those earbuds in their ears all the time, and even when they're walking across campus, they are running across campus. How can you appreciate the number of birds that we have on this campus? I think we spend a lot of time looking at ourselves as a species to see how we're doing. It's sort of like reading your own press clippings. I think we ought to look at some of our other relatives on the planet, and I think they tell us something else about our behavior that we might not be very, you know, that might be hard to take. There are some fish, some frogs, some birds, some mammals in this North America that would say, oh no, they're not moving into the neighborhood, are they? And I don't want to be an invasive species. I'd turn around that question. I'd love to hear about the positive side of that. I'm sure there is.
Okay. Anybody else want to take this new media question?
We're finding that new technology, including media, is really helpful if we accept it as one tool. But it is important, as Dan has just mentioned, that we not allow ourselves to be inundated by it. so that we can be informed by the wisdom of a place, or as others would say, the genius of a place. So for someone who is isolated and remote, they might first get introduced to that concept electronically. But if they can't get the buds out of their ears and experience it, then the future, I think, is going to be challenging.
Yes.
Jay, Johnson County Community College. I know this is really about local placemaking, but I'm going to go global here a little bit. We held a conference at my college last week. We had folks from 70 community colleges talking about sustainability, global warming, climate change, and all the data and all the good things. What reached people was a performance called Bella Gaia of NASA satellite visualizations to music and performance. And I think we need to keep in mind here that art, music, all this matters because it's a way of reaching people that all that in the world will never reach. And so, as we deal with these incredibly critical issues of our day, if we don't include the arts, if we don't include music, if we don't include all these things, we are in a sense wasting our time. So I guess my question would be to you, and maybe I'll throw a softball to Bob, because he's dealt with this before. How do we do it?
You're on. Well, I do believe that art has a powerful role to reawaken us, because those that are so isolated at this point because of media, because of our Western civilization, and have not had that experience of being transformed by being surrounded in a beautiful natural environment, can be reminded of that by this powerful media. You know, our architecture in medieval times was really capturing images and shapes and forms and textures from nature. And before they had all this media, that's what they were attempting to do in a cathedral, was to reconnect people with the natural system within which the cathedral was built. And today, media, and particularly well done, artful media, can reawaken those systems that have been asleep for a long time. But maybe if we have more of that, we'll find more people out in nature reconnecting with it and finding a way to redevelop a regenerative, positive relationship with the natural capital that surrounds us.
Okay, so there's some, where are you pointing, Shelka? Okay, anyone, other thoughts? Yes, please.
My name is Emily Vowell. I'm the Executive Director of Accessible Arts via State Kansas. And I just wanted to give a very positive comment. Somebody had mentioned working with local governments and mayors, and I'm very fortunate to work with the mayor in downtown Kansas City and Wyandotte County. And he was in a recent meeting with some other governors and was very actively seeking some art funding and grants, and went to an Art Town grant meeting with the NEA at his last meeting, and was actively seeking creative placemaking activities and ways to support a downtown area that is low income and economically disadvantaged, and is actively seeking the arts to support that area. And just very fortunate to work with a local government that is actively seeking these opportunities and is searching for the NEA and looking for creative placemaking, and is utilizing his resources, and it is out there and people are doing it. And I'm fortunate to work in such an area that is doing it and being the arts organization that is a part of that. So I want to say it is active and out there, and the NEA did support his efforts in seeking that out, so I wanted to say thank you. So.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get a little bit more contested. Well, it's so polite and everything, and you know what?
Now they're hands. Now they're hands.
Okay, I'm going to call on you, and then I'm going to call on Tim. So,
I have a contested question.
okay, move it out. Would you introduce yourself?
I'm Leslie. I'm with the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association. I am dying to know if Brownback canceling funding of the Kansas Arts Commission actually spurred more interest in other states for their own arts commissions.
Interesting.
That's yours.
This is the my 11-foot pole rule. The things you can't touch even with a 10-foot pole. I think it's safe to say that other states don't want to be in the situation that Kansas is in now. I mean, you know, everybody wants, you know, support, and and funding. There's no question. Fortunately, and we saw this in Topeka yesterday, and we've seen it in Lawrence squared all day today. The communities have really rolled up their sleeves and said, God damn it, we're going to survive, we're going to prevail, we're going to make this work. The NEA can still make direct funds to arts organizations throughout Kansas. And I've been inspired by what I saw at Percolator just a few minutes ago. What I saw with Susan's work at earlier today at the Arts Center. What Sarah Lynn is doing. There seems to be a tremendous amount of energy within the community to push the arts agenda forward, and that is more necessary now than ever.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a harder question.
That was pretty hard.
Okay. Tell us why NEA then said no. If there's no state match, it's a no for state grants.
Well,
or have I got that right?
Well, it's mandated by law that there be a state match. So we don't have discretion in that. Part of the whole conception is that our funds are leveraged. That there is a match. And remember that 40% of all our funds are earmarked for the states anyway to begin with. So the states have Suzanne can probably speak to this better than I can, but the states already have a huge claim on our funds, and we just want to make sure those funds go out in a way that's mandated by law and has the most leverage.
And I agree with that. Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Herndon. I'm an urban planner and landscape architect. I want to direct this question, please, to Bob and Rocco, although it may dovetail into, it may elicit more of a panel-wide response. In the context of funding that comes from the private sector, such as, a great example I think that's rather contemporary would be the Crystal Bridges Museum in Northwest Arkansas.
I was just there 2 days ago. That
is, almost instantaneously the preeminent American art venue in this country. However, there is some consternation associated with that new institution as it relates to what Walmart does, its corporate policies, its retail omnivorence and all that stuff. Another example, that's not contemporary would be, the Carnegie libraries throughout this country. And while as a cultural landmark, and particularly more and more as time goes on, the relevance of those buildings within the landscape of a community is high. But if we really dissect the history and the evolution of how those buildings came to be, we understand that it was a robber baron mentality based on the blood, sweat, and tears of a great body of humanity that elicited those, that engendered those funds to build those. So back to Dave's comment, and you used as an example the downtown 9th and New Hampshire vacant property that certainly by default in sort of a de facto public place, public space. You've worked there, other people have worked there. It's a fine open space. But now here's the question. How do we dovetail how do we justify the private sector funding, and I'll define it in this particular question as developer money, and the money that's injected into a community versus, the collateral damage, the incidental damage, or the sadness and heartache and discontent it may shroud a community with.
So Bob, do you want to take it first?
Do you still have an 11-foot pole?
It's on loan.
Well, first of all, a long time ago, I got over the source of money and raising funds for environmental work early on, I found that some of my colleagues wouldn't accept some of the money because it was coming from a tainted source. And so you mentioned a couple of good ones. I think it's extraordinary that one of Sam Walton's daughters was inspired, first of all, to assemble that collection, and secondly, to hire Moshe Safdie to create that experience in Arkansas. And I celebrate that, and I would be delighted to accept, Walmart money to do that, tomorrow, in a different area, in a different purpose, in a different design, different place. In a way, Moshe celebrated the genius of that place, but he actually created that environment. I mean, it is an oak forest, but that stream wasn't there, and all the rest. So he took something and enhanced it with significant money from Walmart. And I celebrate that. That may be part of what continues to turn Walmart in a new direction. I think there's a very good chance that Walmart money, well, it already to some degree has funded a life cycle analysis tool that could, in the very near future, if it starts being used, transform manufacturing on this planet. They have 12,000 suppliers, and they're very close to requiring those suppliers to respond to a new tool called Earthster in terms of staying in that supply chain. And I think there are literally, Carnegie's another example, there are many other examples. So as far as I'm concerned, if money, no matter the source, is enhancing the quality of life and the vitality of our communities and reawakening us to the natural capital within which we're living, I accept it.
My name's Jack. That's right.
Go ahead.
My name's Jack Altman. I'm just a citizen of Lawrence, and I happen to be a contemporary of Rocco Landesman, who also grew up in Clayton, Missouri.
Did you go to Clayton High?
I did, and I actually knew him, but that's 50 years ago. So he
What's your name again?
Huh?
What's your
Jack
name?
Altman. I went to Clayton my freshman year, and then I switched. Why anyway? Anyway, my question is to take that question one step further. Let's take the specific, and I'm devil's advocate here, because I see both sides of this. Let's take the 9th and New Hampshire space, and let's talk about it as an art space, and we've talked about it as a development space, but how do we get the conversation of enjoining those? Because I hear artists being the same way developers are. It must be an art space, or it must be a hotel. Where do we get it together through funding from any source to make it happen in our town? Because we do need development as passionately as we need art.
Can I just answer this though? It's really political leadership. I'm sorry, you guys have to get out there and vote. And you've got to vote for the people that can engender the conversation. And the conversation that you want to have. Because if you don't do that, the two sides can never come together. It really has to be the political leadership that determines how your community, or indeed how your state, responds to the various issues that are important to you as citizens.
Let me respond just real quickly to that as well, since we're talking about it. The way that the Percolator art space responded to this issue wasn't to say that it had to be an art space. What we did was we created an exhibition, it's up now, please come on the weekends, 12 to 6, called This Green Space. And it's a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue, where we're talking about what has happened there over a long period of time before we were here, to the current proposal on the table. And then we're allowing visitors to actually create their own visions of what might happen there or what they remember doing there. So what we're trying to do is actually start that dialogue.
Okay, Mary's had her hand up, so I want to call on Mary. Where are you? There you are. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Mary Doveton. I'm the director of Theater Lawrence. And I think that the project that we're doing, we're getting ready to break ground on a new theater building. And I think we have to look at win-win situations with developers. The same developer that we're sort of demonizing here this morning was part of a group that donated the land for the new theater. theater, which will be the cultural center of the new urbanist program. So I think that we can't say that people are on one side or on the other side, that they're developers and they're artists. I think we're all working together for a better community. We just have to find ways that we can both win.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Steve Clark, planner architect. I want to ask a question called.
Could you speak really
loud? I want
loud?
to ask a question to follow up on Daniel's waving of the phone and think a little bit about the film person here. When we're talking about art, we're talking about creation. When we're talking about place, it seems like the conversation is always about looking backwards and preserving and protecting place, and protecting the animals and protecting things. I wonder if there's a way for this group to think about, so I have a friend who refused to use email to this day. And I keep asking them, if when the phone was invented, how many years would you have waited until you had used it to communicate? So I think the prevalence of this is something that is, we can argue against it, absolutely. The arguments are very poetic. My question is, though, how do we paint a picture, using our imagination for the future, how do we paint a positive picture of place with this as part of it?
Rocco,
That
you
goes
have
there.
No? Anybody?
Well, I just, you know, again, and the problem with, you know, having 5-minute presentations is that, you know, you just throw something out there and it's very provocative, I hope. But I think the question I really want to raise is that question. And I think Bob gave a pretty good, you know, first glance kind of answer, and that is, if you begin to think that, ask yourself, what does this tool do? And if we avoid the problem we've had with so much of the bells and whistles that we get attached to as human invention, if we can avoid falling into the fact to where the machine and the technology starts controlling us, and that we decide, you know what, I'm going to turn this off. I don't need it right now. I mean, it worries me when students go into panic attacks because their cell phone service got cut off. And then they come and tell me, I'm not connected anymore. And I'm going, you aren't? Really? You're not connected anymore? Think of what the message that conveys. I'm just arguing you are connected, or you better be. If you're that person who says, oh, I'm not connected anymore, that's a pretty good symptom of a problem.
Okay, we've got another question here.
I just want to add something to that, because there's another important part of what you said, and that is when we talk about nature, we're talking about restoring what was, every animal, etc. And I think that's not true.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of us recognize we're an integral part of nature, and we're co-creating with the natural forces of nature a future.
Yeah.
And that future can either add vitality and life and be life-supporting, or not. And we've been on a path for a couple of centuries where it is not. And now we have the opportunity, using this technology, frankly, to connect ourselves with where successes have occurred, to move forward as co-creators in a positive, loving way.
Hi, thank you very much for coming. I'm a professor in the psychology department. My name is Mark. To make placemaking economically viable, citizens have to come. And if you make the art that they like, they'll come. But does that mean that we need to expect artists to make their work more, quote, accessible, which can be a dirty word? In other words, how can we infuse art into our communities without squelching artists' unique vision, especially when their vision may not be immediately accessible? Do we have to start encouraging our artists to make more, quote unquote, accessible work, and even if that means squelching their...
Dave may have something on this too.
Yeah, I think that was my point
Okay.
about arts education and about quality.
Right.
Is I think that the more you know about the arts, the more you are willing to accept things that aren't right in front of you that you understand.
Right.
And therefore, you have to take the long view. You have to invest in good quality arts education and then expose the entire community to good quality art, knowing full well that there will be people that will literally walk out the door,
You're
and it's
sparing the
okay.
artist any responsibility. I mean,
Why does the artist have a responsibility
no,
to do
that's
that? I'll let Dave
No,
talk
I'm playing
about
devil's
that,
advocate.
but personally, I think that artists are about communication. And there's some artists that just don't really care whether they're communicating with you or not.
Okay, I'm gonna go Anthea, Kevin, and then maybe, then maybe
Want to address
Liz.
that?
Okay,
Yeah.
quickly.
No, this is an excellent question. It's what I do for a living, and it's what the Percolator does all the time. First of all, I think there's another dichotomy that we need to break down, which is the artist and audience. We're all part of the same thing. We're all artists. We all, started as artists. Maybe we've forgotten, but also I think that I don't think it's really true that people don't want to experience challenging ideas. I think the presentation of them is important and thinking through them, and a lot of that has to do with giving folks who come an opportunity to dialogue, an opportunity to participate in some way. But there's a whole spectrum of possibilities, from the artist who perhaps proposes something that is very challenging, that raises serious questions, to the kind of art that encourages direct participation in the outcome of the work. And all those things are important.
Okay, thank you. Anthea.
Yeah, just real quick. Anthea Scoopus from the Lead Center. Quick statement, then
From the
question.
Lead Center.
Lead Center, sorry. So we're talking about creative placemaking, and we all kind of come from our own placemaking, our creative placemaking spaces, Lead Center, Lawrence Arts Center, all that. But I'm wondering about the spaces in between, the ones where we need to connect, because I hear us talking about our individual areas, and then I hear a lot more of a more holistic, that we want impact. We have all had these dialogues about these different issues, but we haven't had the dialogue where we can take it to the entire community, where there's that large impact. And I think what Rocco was talking about, how the NEA is beginning to talk with the National Science and with the health departments and education, that's kind of like what we need to do here. We need to bring everyone in, but how do we do that? How do we fill those spaces in between and open those pathways?
Okay, great. Just in case I forget this, you're all going to be called to another meeting. If you signed our sheet, you're in. But I want to go to Kevin Wilmot.
Kevin Wilmot, I'm a filmmaker and a professor at the film department. I want to talk about corporate censorship in my field, film. Dan and I made a film a few years back called The Only Good Emmy. And there's a growing film movement here in Lawrence, in the state, in many different ways. And independent film right now in particular is become very difficult to get your film seen after you've made the film. The technology has made it more difficult in some way. You would think it would make it easier, but actually it's kind of making it more difficult. But more importantly, it is the corporate censorship of things. And the example I always give is that reason you don't see Native Americans on McDonald's commercials, they don't think they can make any money off Native Americans. And so when they don't think you can make money off of the art you produce, then you have a very difficult time getting it seen. Does the NEA, have people told you about this growing? So, is there money to be had so we can fight these suckers?
That's the 22-foot pole. Well, you've hit a button of mine. From my perspective, and I know we've got to sign off, so maybe this will be my conclusion. The reason we have, presumably, public funding of the arts, and NEA at all, is so that the marketplace is not the sole determinant of what is seen and what is accessed. And by the marketplace, I don't mean just the commercial marketplace, which is the obvious one of, if you have a play and someone doesn't want to put it on Broadway, maybe it shouldn't be done because there's no commercial marketplace for it. There's also the quasi-commercial marketplace, which is exactly what you're referencing. Corporations, individual donors, private philanthropists, et cetera, who are themselves determining maybe, from their view, what is supported and what is not. The interesting thing about what we're doing with public funding is that there is an actual peer review process, and Sarah Lynn knows exactly what I'm talking about because she ran this process at the NEA for a number of years. There's a public process by which there are peer reviews that only assess the quality and importance of that work, not its level of support or its level of viability. That's why we need a National Endowment for the Arts that it begins to be on a commensurate level with any other country in the developed world.
I'm getting the signal to close it down, but I have to let Wes have a word because he had his hand up. So I am sorry, you may have to walk, but I have to let Wes Jackson.
Okay. I won't pick any one of you to respond. You take your pick amongst yourselves. In E.M. Forster's Howard's End, there's the line, "It all turns on affection, don't you know?" Aldo Leopold and Sand County Almanac, in dealing with the consideration of how it is that we destroy the wild. And he addresses the consideration that what we need is more education. And he says, but is it the volume of education which needs stepping up? Is there not something missing in the content as well? Something which will change our loyalties and affections. In mid-April, Wendell Berry is going to give the Jefferson Lecture at the Kennedy Center in D.C. And the title of his talk is "It All Turns on Affection, Don't You Know?" And he traces what's necessary. I'm wondering, what do the arts have to offer that will provide that missing content that Leopold talked about? And what are the prerequisites that make it possible for the affection to happen? If Wendell is right, and I think he is. So if we start with the idea that this country, as Stegner said in Angle of Repose, that there are boomers and there are stickers. Stegner's father was a boomer. His mother was a sticker. We have a system now that is rewarding the boomers. That before you can have the affection for a place, you have to have first of all, the potential for sympathy. And you can't have that sympathy until you can be a place where you dig in. The University of Kansas, like all major universities and minor universities, does not have a homecoming major where they would work to help students in a curriculum to go up to a place and dig in. There's one university that is starting that. It's a small, happens to be Catholic college.
Tell us really quickly now.
Starting that.
Tell us quickly.
You want me to shut up?
No, I want you to wrap up.
Oh, well, the question is that it seems to me we're threshing around by not dealing what I think are the basic considerations. Well, okay, I'll shut
No.
I'll leave it as an open question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm just getting the high sign back here that Rocco needs to get on the road, and I wanted to, first of all, I want to thank all of you for speaking. There's so many great minds in the room. And will you join me in thanking the panel and especially Rocco?